Quincy Jones once sat in an interview, recalling how he used to nudge Ray Charles awake when Ray came through town. Quincy was only 14 when the blind pianist escaped Florida and showed up looking for a fresh start, still carrying the memory of what it felt like to see until age 7. Quincy said, "Men like Ray, the architects of early R&B and soul, had to retreat into the deepest corners of their spirit just to survive what the world put them through. People like to say R&B was built on romance, on candlelit rooms and slow dances. But according to Quincy, there was a truth underneath it that was far darker. In all the years he spent inside studios, on buses, in hotel hallways, one man made him admit something chilling. There was nobody on this planet more promiscuous than him. And this, Quincy insisted, wasn't idle gossip whispered in green rooms. It was his own first-hand experience. He watched tours bend around this man's desires. He heard about marriages ripped apart in clusters. According to people who worked the front desks and back offices, record labels quietly kept secret folders just to track who had been near him and when. Quincy remembered dancers bolting out of hotel rooms in stunned silence, heels clacking against the hallway tile. He heard stories of tape reels that executives allegedly ordered destroyed because what had been captured between takes was never meant for public ears. And he was present when a scandal born from one night of this man's pleasure almost pushed an entire label into financial freefall. For decades, the industry treated this as a file that should never be opened. Today, we crack that drawer. Quincy's stories lead us through 10 men whose lives blurred genius and desire until you couldn't tell where the music ended and the addiction began. And somewhere in this list, hidden between leather, incense, jealousy, and quiet smiles, lies the man Quincy believed was the most promiscuous R&B star who ever lived. Marvin Gaye, the addicted lover. To understand Marvin Gaye, you almost have to split him in two. On one side, there was the public visionary who reshaped American soul, the man whose voice scored protests, bedroom confessions, and late-night drives. On the other, there was the private figure whose life became an endless loop of desire, shame, and compulsion. The deeper you follow that second man, the more the darkness starts swallowing the light. Marvin stepped into the 1,970 seconds carrying wounds that never really closed. His father's strict Pentecostal discipline turned affection into something dangerous and pleasure into something that felt like sin. People close to the family believed that early spiritual repression was exactly what sent Marvin to the outer edges of experience once he tasted freedom. When he realized he could choose his own temptations, he chased them until there was nothing left but the edge. During the What's Going On era in 1971, Motown staffers began to notice a pattern that no one wanted to say out loud. Marvin would arrive at the studio looking either emotionally overstimulated or physically drained, eyes distant, movements slow. According to one producer, Marvin treated intimacy the way other artists treated vocal warm-ups. If he didn't feel something first, something raw, something electric, he believed the records would come out flat. No one dared confront him. By then, he was already a star whose pain translated into platinum. But the whispers started anyway. That same year, something else appeared. The leather notebook. It wasn't an urban legend invented years later. Multiple Motown insiders said Marvin carried a small brown journal everywhere, onto tour buses, down hotel corridors, into label meetings. The pages, they claimed, were covered in initials instead of full names and strange symbols no one could fully decode. Some insisted it was an emotional ledger, linking encounters to melodies and lyrical ideas. Others said it was simply a list of conquests, something he flipped through like a private spark before stepping in front of a microphone. When Marvin died, that notebook vanished. No relative has ever publicly admitted to finding it. By 1973, during the Let's Get It On sessions, the rumors shifted from suggestive to explicit. Several Motown engineers privately claimed that on certain unreleased takes, you could hear faint sounds that did not belong in a professional studio. Subtle rustling, breath patterns that didn't match the vocal delivery, the quiet rhythm of two bodies sharing one space. Nothing graphic, but undeniably intimate. According to those stories, the label moved quickly. Executives were said to have seized certain reels and locked them away in the vault on West Grand Boulevard, files marked so they would never be accidentally queued up again. The tapes have never surfaced. Whether they were destroyed or still sit in a box somewhere is still debated, but the legend of those sessions has become one of Motown's quietest ghosts. Then came what insiders now call the darkness sessions of 1976. Working in Los Angeles, Marvin reportedly started demanding that every light in the studio be turned off, not dimmed, killed completely. Engineers even taped over the switches because he didn't trust the smallest glow from a console or hallway. He told people that sight itself interfered with his senses. Those present said Marvin paced slowly around the microphone in pitch black, using the thump of his own heartbeat as a metronome. A backup singer later told a journalist she walked out halfway through a take because it felt less like a recording session and more like trespassing on someone's private ritual. After his brutal divorce in 1978, which cost him the first year's royalties from Here My Dear, Marvin slid even further. Cocaine sharpened his highs and deepened his crashes. Those who knew him said the combination made his obsessions more intense, more desperate. Friends claimed he kept private cassette tapes filled with whispered monologues, late-night confessions, and, at times, barely audible, intimate sounds material he supposedly used as emotional triggers before writing. No one can say for sure where those tapes ended up. Some insist family members quietly destroyed them. Others are convinced they still exist in a private archive, waiting to surface. But the most disturbing detail, the one many people believe Quincy Jones hinted at without naming Marvin directly, came from witnesses who saw both sides of him up close. They said Marvin wasn't simply addicted to sex. He was said to be addicted to punishment. Pleasure made him feel alive. Guilt made him feel worthy of forgiveness. He needed both to create. Every classic album that built his legacy, they claimed, was born from that exhausting cycle of wanting, falling, and then hurting himself for wanting in the first place. Rick James, the leather and chains king. If Marvin Gaye lived on the edge of desire, Rick James stepped clean off the cliff. He didn't just blur the line between pleasure and chaos. According to nearly everyone who crossed his path in the late 70 seconds and early 80 seconds, he ripped that line to shreds. Quincy Jones once described Rick as a walking sexual explosion, and in that era, no one in the industry argued. Rick carried a charge that made entire rooms feel unsafe and addictive at the same time. Unlike many stars who hid their vices behind closed doors, Rick flaunted his. He celebrated them, weaponized them, and turned them into a persona that terrified executives while hypnotizing everyone else. His reputation wasn't built on whispers alone. Many of Rick's scandals were documented in public tabloid covers, court documents, breathless magazine features. Between 1979 and 1984. As his fame skyrocketed, so did the stories about him. His Hollywood Hills house became notorious, referred to quietly among journalists and label staff as the Dungeon House. Those reports weren't just metaphor. Multiple visitors later said the basement glowed red, its walls covered in velvet, racks lined with leather straps and restraints, and closets stuffed with costumes. Rick treated the space like his own private nightclub, where dawn meant nothing and every rule dissolved at the door. One of the most persistent industry rumors focused on Rick's dancers, the women who followed him from rehearsals to tours. According to two former Motown employees, Rick enforced a house rule for any dancer staying under his roof. Leather only, all day, every day. Tight, polished black leather that squeaked with each step. Some called it a fetish. Others said it was a power play. Everyone agreed it was intentional. Rick believed visual control kept the energy in his house at the fever pitch he needed. A former assistant recalled an afternoon in 1982 when Rick demanded the air conditioning be turned off because the leather needs to cling more. The dancers didn't debate. They stood there in rising heat, beads of sweat forming, waiting for Rick to announce the night's agenda. Then there was the moment that studio technicians still talk about the chained entrance. It happened in 1981 at Record Plant in Los Angeles, the day Rick arrived to overdub vocals for street songs. Staff were prepping the booth when the hallway suddenly fell silent. Rick walked in wearing black boots and a studded jacket, and behind him came two women, each attached to him by a thin leather chain clipped to a collar around her neck. They matched his stride perfectly, as if walking a runway designed for him alone. Engineers froze mid-conversation. A production manager instinctively stepped aside, giving them a path like they were royalty no one had been warned about. The women kept their eyes down, their movements synchronized and controlled, like choreography without music. No one dared ask what was happening. Rick moved straight toward the booth, chain still wrapped in his hand. But the true shock came hours later. According to an assistant, after the late-night session, Rick led the women back out the same way they had entered, collars on, chains clipped past executives who suddenly found reasons to look in the opposite direction. No official complaints. No memos. No investigations. Everyone understood the unwritten rule of that period. If Rick James was involved, you pretended you didn't see anything you couldn't put in a press release. Throughout the early 80 seconds, the stories multiplied. Nights soaked in drugs that bled into mornings with no memory. Rooms packed with bodies in leather, smoke curling in the air, and music pounding so loud it blurred reality. Dancers vanished from his circle without explanation. Hotel staff, it was said, received extra cash just to forget what they had seen. Rick didn't just have a fetish. He constructed an entire universe around it. And anyone who entered that world had to obey his rules or leave. If Marvin wrestled with desire, Rick James surrendered to it entirely. He didn't hide his compulsions. He profited from them. And in Quincy's recollection, no R&B star ever carried sexual energy as theatrical, as loud, or as dangerous as Rick James. Prince, the genderless temptation. Prince didn't simply arrive in the music industry. He slipped into it like a beautifully tailored threat. Even among the giants of the 1,980 seconds, he projected something nobody could quite define, a force that merged gender, desire, and danger until they felt like the same sensation. Quincy Jones was once quoted as saying that Prince was sexy in a way that made even straight men uncomfortable, and when you dig into the stories behind the purple glow, that line makes unsettling sense. Prince grew up small in stature, quiet, often overlooked. That early invisibility became his weapon. It sharpened his sense of control, taught him how to direct a room's attention with a single movement, a single glance. From that foundation, he built a persona so charged that it felt almost supernatural. By the time the Dirty Mind era hit in 1980, Prince had mastered the art of turning other people's discomfort into his own dominance. He walked on stage in lingerie, thigh-high boots, and revealing briefs, not because he craved shock for its own sake, but because it unsettled audiences enough that they could never forget him. Inside the studio, that persona didn't fade, it intensified. Engineers from his early Minneapolis sessions recounted a ritual he followed before recording. He would strip down until only a sliver of fabric remained, maybe a lace shirt hanging open to his navel, maybe just his signature cutout shorts. This wasn't about vanity, it was method. Prince believed that the less he wore, the closer he got to unfiltered expression. Some nights he cut vocals with sweat rolling down his bare chest under dim purple lights, hips swaying as if he could feel an invisible crowd pressing up against the glass. A few engineers eventually refused to work late sessions with him. They said the energy felt too intimate, too charged, too much like being trapped inside someone else's fantasy. The rumors surrounding his sexuality were never built on scandal alone. They were born from confusion. Prince made both men and women tremble, and he didn't apologize for the ripple effect that left behind. There were whispers, especially in the early 80 seconds, about private gatherings where Prince arranged the room like a living art installation. Men and women were positioned around him like sculptures, all wearing the erotic, androgynous style he had perfected. Some guests claimed he drifted through the crowd, touching jawlines, adjusting collars, tightening leather straps, less like he was seducing individuals and more like he was conducting an atmosphere. Darker stories circulated too. During the 1999 period, insiders claimed Prince kept a locked wardrobe stuffed with custom fetish pieces, lace gloves, leather harnesses, translucent bodysuits, studded chokers. He wasn't embarrassed by them. He treated them like instruments. Each piece was an extension of a mood he wanted to create. One assistant recalled opening a trunk meant for tour costumes and finding dozens of handwritten tags attached to outfits, each labeled with a single word: submission, angel, punishment, purity broken. It was as if he was cataloging emotions the same way other artists cataloged sounds. The most controversial story, though, followed him for years: the Sunset Sound Session in 1983. According to people who claimed to be there, Prince walked into the live room with two female protégées dressed in near-transparent bodysuits. They stood in silence as he removed his shirt and ordered the lights to be dropped to near total darkness. The session lasted around 3 hours. The women reportedly never spoke, never left the room. Staff described the vibe as almost religious, a shrine to erotic power, with Prince moving between the control board and the microphone like a high priest of sensuality. In that dim glow, he seemed delicate and dangerous, masculine and feminine all at once, everything and nothing at the same time. For Prince, sexuality wasn't a simple preference. It was an environment he knew how to build and weaponize. And in the way Quincy and others remembered him, Prince wasn't acting seductive. He was seduction itself, a presence that rearranged the air the moment he walked into a room. Teddy Pendergrass, the bedroom concert legend. There was one question about Teddy Pendergrass that floated through every backstage hallway and never really found an answer. How did a single man make an entire room of women lose control? Because Teddy wasn't just a soul singer. He was an event, a reaction, a physical shift in the air. Quincy Jones once remarked that women looked at Teddy and forgot to breathe, and during the late 70 seconds, nothing captured him better than that. Teddy's rise with Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes already hinted at something dangerous just under the surface. Even before his solo career, he carried an intensity that didn't feel completely safe. By 1977, when he stepped out on his own, that intensity erupted into something the industry had never quite seen before: the legendary women-only concerts. These weren't marketing stunts. They felt like controlled emotional earthquakes. From Philadelphia to Atlanta, venues filled with thousands of women wrapped in fur coats and silk dresses, the smell of perfume hanging so thick it seemed to fog the aisles. When Teddy walked onto the stage, shirt halfway open, sweat catching in the spotlight, the sound that erupted from the crowd didn't resemble normal cheering. It sounded primal, like something pulled from the deepest parts of their nervous systems. Emergency medical teams became a standard part of his tour planning. At a 1,979 show, paramedics reportedly treated more than 20 women who fainted before Teddy reached the final song. Some trembled in their seats, some cried openly, some said their legs simply buckled without warning. Behind the curtain, the chaos didn't calm down. Industry talk spread that after these concerts, Teddy's dressing room looked like a high-end boutique detonated inside it. Lace bras, silk panties, garters, perfume bottles with handwritten notes tucked inside fans left pieces of themselves behind like offerings. What startled insiders wasn't the volume of gifts. It was what Teddy allegedly did with them. According to a longtime stage assistant, Teddy kept a large wooden trunk labeled only "the drawer." He never opened it in front of anyone. But after each show, he carefully picked a handful of items from the piles on the floor and placed them inside the trunk, almost ceremonially. No one knew where the collection went between tours. The trunk traveled with him from hotel to hotel, always appearing, always disappearing, but never spotted in his home. His love life offstage carried darker shades. People who spent serious time around Teddy believed he battled with intimacy because he lived inside a non-stop emotional spotlight. On stage, he was adored in a way that didn't leave much room for vulnerability. Several girlfriends later admitted that Teddy seemed afraid of being emotionally exposed. He was more comfortable being desired than being truly known. The women-only shows weren't just about giving fans a fantasy. For Teddy, they may have been an escape, a place where he could drown out the quieter parts of his own fears with the noise of pure adoration. Then there was the rumor that he kept overlapping long-term relationships orchestrated so precisely that each woman believed she was the central figure in his life. Some insiders claimed he ran an unofficial 2-to-1 structure years before anyone gave the pattern a name. Others said managers helped coordinate schedules to avoid emotional collisions. In the end, the most haunting thing about Teddy Pendergrass was simple. The force that made him irresistible was the same force that locked him in a kind of emotional isolation. Behind the screams, the fainting, and the hidden trunk of intimate souvenirs stood a man who spent his life being what everyone else wanted, and rarely what he might have wanted for himself. To the world, Teddy was the fantasy. Behind the scenes, he was the cost of that fantasy. Barry White, the low-voice hypnotist. Long before anyone called him the maestro of love, Barry White understood exactly what he could do to a room. That deep, molten voice didn't just sing over tracks. It went around logic, straight into the nervous system, and settled there. Quincy Jones once joked that Barry didn't sing, he hypnotized. And anyone who shared a studio with him quietly agreed it wasn't much of a joke. What the public saw was a polished giant in tailored suits, slow grooves, and romantic lyrics. The real Barry, the one buried under velvet jackets and gold records, lived by private rituals and quiet rules that shaped every note he recorded. In the early 1970 seconds, as "I've Got So Much to Give" climbed the charts, Barry built a reputation among producers for running sessions in near darkness. He couldn't stand harsh lighting. He said it ruined the mood. MGM studio staff later admitted that at his request, regular bulbs were swapped out for low-watt amber lamps designed to imitate a bedroom at midnight. But he didn't stop at the lights. Rumors spread that Barry insisted on keeping a full queen-sized bed in the live room covered in satin sheets so he could stay in character while working. One assistant recalled a session in late 1973 where Barry stretched out across the bed, lyric sheets in hand, humming into the mattress fibers and saying he needed the vibrations to settle in his bones before stepping up to the mic. The most persistent stories, however, centered on smell. People close to him said Barry used a personal oil blend, frankincense, patchouli, and a secret musk he never disclosed, designed, some believed, to trigger physical responses. Engineers claimed the scent clung to the booth for hours after he left. A background vocalist once described walking into Studio B right after one of his vocal takes and feeling lightheaded and flushed for no reason she could explain, insisting the room felt wrong, as if she'd walked into someone's private atmosphere instead of a workspace. Barry's romantic life mirrored his studio intensity. He married young, but by 1974, insiders claimed he was managing several long-running relationships at the same time. One woman told a journalist that Barry treated love like arranging harmonies. Every voice had its place, even the ones that weren't supposed to be there at all. There were ongoing whispers that he preferred jealous partners because jealousy, to him, meant passion. Several girlfriends allegedly clashed backstage during his 1975 tour, each convinced she was Barry's true center of gravity. Then came talk of what friends called his evening rituals. According to those close to him, Barry prepared for intimate encounters the same way he prepared for sessions. Low, dim lights. Music carefully adjusted to a slow 72 BPM. The same oil blend burning in a brass holder he carried from city to city like sacred equipment. When airline staff misplaced one of his bags at LAX in 1976, people on his team said Barry refused to check into his hotel until the case with the incense and oils was located. He supposedly told them he couldn't function without it. Behind the smooth image lived a man who curated every sensation: light, scent, temperature, even the feel of the air itself. Barry White didn't just perform sensuality. He engineered it from the ground up, and for the people who stepped into his orbit, it became hard to tell where simple seduction ended and something closer to hypnosis began. Al Green, the gospel Casanova. To the outside world, Al Green was the pure voice of Southern soul, the man who could rise from a velvet-toned whisper to a gospel wail in a single breath. But behind the glow of the spotlight and the later image of the preacher in the pulpit, there was a life much messier, more volatile, and more contradictory than most fans ever knew. Quincy Jones remarked that Al was sexy in a dangerous way because no one could predict when he would explode, and that unpredictability followed him like a shadow. Before he became an ordained minister in the mid-1980 seconds, Al Green's personal life was a maze of passion, jealousy, and emotional collisions. At the height of his fame between 1972 and 1977, insiders said he lived on two extremes at once: the gentle, scripture-quoting, romantic on stage, and the emotionally unpredictable lover once the doors closed. His relationships in that decade were legendary for how turbulent they became. Friends claimed Al rarely dated casually. When he became involved with someone, it was intense from the beginning, and he often maintained several of those intense relationships at the same time. The emotional friction, according to those around him, seemed to energize him. A former girlfriend said Al was drawn to possessive, fiery partners and believed that the more volatile the emotions, the more power he carried into the studio. There were even rumors that he allowed jealousy to flare between women at his mansion outside Memphis, standing back and watching arguments unfold like experiments in some twisted emotional lab. One infamous story traces back to October 1974, after a house party that stretched well past sunrise. A backing musician later claimed that two women who believed they were each living with Al confronted one another in the kitchen. The shouting escalated quickly, accusations flying. According to that account, Al watched silently for a long moment, only stepping in when one of them threatened to walk out of the mansion permanently. It was as if the emotional intensity fed something inside him that calm could never reach. The most unsettling rumors focused on control. Multiple insiders insisted Al had an unspoken rule for women he dated. They were not allowed to show any visible interest in other men, even in professional environments. One backup singer claimed that if he thought she spent too long talking to a male staffer, he would turn distant and cold for days. His jealousy, by most accounts, rarely turned explosive in public. Instead, it simmered quietly, tightening the air in whatever room he occupied. On stage, he radiated warmth and devotion. Offstage, he seemed drawn to relationships that felt doomed by their own intensity. Several women close to him hinted that Al viewed romantic suffering as part of his spiritual journey. The more pain wrapped around a relationship, the more he believed it purified him. That belief created a disturbing cycle where he chased both love and emotional punishment at the same time. By the early 1982, all those contradictions, strict religious guilt, fame, temptation, and his own unstable patterns collided. People who knew him during his shift into ministry said Al was running from a past that contained too much of everything, too much pleasure, too much turmoil, too much temptation. To the public, Al Green eventually became Pastor Al, the man in the pulpit. But to those who witnessed his wildest years up close, he was the gospel Casanova, a man trapped between God and desire, holiness and heat, salvation and self-destruction. Lionel Richie, the quiet seducer. For years, people treated Lionel Richie like the safe harbor of R&B, the gentleman, the soft-spoken romantic, the man whose voice sounded incapable of causing damage. But Quincy Jones once said something that shattered that image. Lionel might have spoken softly, but some of the loudest scandals of the 80s unfolded quietly around him. And when you peel back the magazine covers and polite interviews, that observation starts to feel less like a joke and more like a diagnosis. Lionel's seduction was never wild or aggressive. It was slow, warm, and dangerously gentle. Insiders from his Commodore's days said women didn't fall for Lionel because he chased them. They fell because he listened. He had a way of making a woman feel seen, as if every word she said mattered. That tenderness, however, came with consequences. By the early 1982, people around him believed Lionel was carrying overlapping emotional obligations with women scattered across New York, Atlanta, and Los Angeles. These weren't casual flings. That wasn't his style. They were entangled, emotional, full of phone calls, promises, soft words he didn't quite know how to take back. The scandal that finally cracked his image surfaced in May 1988, the night his carefully maintained persona collided with reality. His wife, Brenda Ritchie, had long suspected that something was wrong, and according to reports, she was right. Lionel had been secretly involved with Diane Alexander, a younger dancer he met while working on music video productions. One night, Brenda reportedly followed Lionel to Diane's Beverly Hills apartment. What happened inside became one of Hollywood's most replayed whispers. According to the police report, Brenda entered the home, found Lionel and Diane together, and a physical confrontation erupted. By the time officers arrived, Lionel was said to be outside on the lawn, shaken, crouched down, while Brenda's anger echoed from inside the building. That scene wasn't just a tabloid flashpoint. It exposed something Lionel had quietly struggled with for years. Behind the gentle voice and love songs was a man drawn to emotional intimacy so intensely that he didn't always know where to stop. Quincy, who had known Lionel since the Commodore's era, once suggested Lionel's weakness wasn't raw lust, it was attachment. He had trouble saying no. He didn't know how to walk away cleanly. The triangle with Brenda and Diane wasn't the only tangle in his story. It was simply the one that escaped into the public record. There were other emotional knots, other quiet arrangements that never made the headlines but kept his inner circle busy trying to contain fallout. Even his interactions with fans sometimes turned unexpectedly volatile. During the Can't Slow Down tour in 1984, a crowd of women outside a Chicago arena became so overwhelming that security reportedly called in local police. As Lionel attempted to slip out the back exit, a barrier buckled and dozens of fans surged forward, clawing at his jacket, reaching for his face, desperate just to touch him. Officers formed a human shield to get him to the car, while Lionel's expression, witnesses said, was pure shock. He never publicly unpacked that night, but tour staff claimed he remained rattled for days. Lionel Richie was never the leather-clad chaos of Rick James or the androgynous fire of Prince. His scandals were quieter, more fragile, and in many ways more dangerous because they were built on affection, on promises, on hearts he never fully learned how to manage. Babyface, the soft-skin heartbreaker. Very few men in R&B ever carried the kind of quiet force Babyface did, a softness that disarmed first and destroyed later. Quincy Jones once described him as sensual without trying, and women who crossed his path often repeated a similar warning. The kinder he seemed, the deeper the trouble. His danger wasn't in excess or spectacle, it was in tenderness. In the early 1990 seconds, Babyface's career exploded. He produced love songs so intimate they sounded like private conversations overheard through a wall. Industry insiders believed many of those lyrics weren't hypothetical, they were rooted in the women who moved through his orbit. Several ex-girlfriends later told reporters that Babyface had an unnerving talent for making each woman feel like the only person in his universe until they found out they weren't alone. Rumors circulated that he quietly maintained overlapping emotional connections with dancers, songwriters, and background vocalists in his Los Angeles sessions. Nothing overtly scandalous in the way tabloids preferred. No wild outbursts. Just a pattern of deeply personal attachments that didn't always come with real commitment. One dancer who worked with him in 1994 said Babyface's sweetness felt like a trap. According to her, he had a way of brushing his hand lightly across someone's shoulder, pairing it with a soft, almost shy smile. That tiny gesture, she said, made women feel chosen, claimed, even before they realized how many other people had felt the same thing. Studio corridors, according to crew members, saw their share of quiet breakdowns. Women crying outside control rooms, devastated not by something loud and cruel, but by the gentle realization that they had misread his intentions. His charm wasn't chaotic, it was precise, and that precision made it more devastating. Then came the rumor that wrapped itself around his legend, the dressing room ritual. Multiple stylists and backup singers claimed Babyface always kept his private room warm, lit only by soft amber lamps, and stocked with a particular vanilla musk oil he applied before going on stage or into high-pressure sessions. They said the scent clung to every surface long after he walked out, warm, comforting, and subtly intoxicating. Some people believed it was just habit. Others were convinced it was calculated, an